Well, let's get started anyway. So, hello, I'm Claire. If I haven't met you, there are a lot of familiar faces here today and some unfamiliar faces, so that's good, that's really nice. I've done a really similar demo to this about, I think maybe like 18 months or 2 years ago, so for some of you, I'm sorry if it's a bit of a repeat of some techniques, but you know, that's alright. Hopefully you'll pick up something different. Or like maybe some different ways to use those same techniques in a different style or a different manner. So today we're going to be focusing on just creating different surface textures on your metal. So we're going to look at a few different ways to do that. We're going to be using the rolling mill and doing some embossing and some impressing. We are going to use the Sandblaster to get a sort of satin finish on the work, and we're going to look at how you can mask off areas to create sort of like highlights and differentiations on the metal surface. I'm going to show you a little cheats way to do some sort of sandblast texture if you don't have a Sandblaster. And I think, what else are we doing? A little bit of reticulation if you haven't done that before. So, and we'll show you the the proper way to reticulate metal as opposed to the accidental way that most people have probably done several times in their silversmithing career. But you know, either works really. And we're also going to do a texturing hammer. So just taking like a $5 Bunnings hammer and cutting into the surface so that we can create our own individual texturing hammers. So I'm just going to show you one way of doing that, and I'm going to finish off like a half-done hammer that I started a little while ago. But you know, you can go to Bunnings and pick up a cheap hammer and make your own version, and it's really like easy and simple and creates really cool textures that aren't on the commercial texturing hammers that you buy. So if you buy a commercial texturing hammer, you're going to end up having the sort of texture that everybody else can get, because you know there's thousands of those hammers available. But if you make your own, you're going to create something that's a bit unique and different from what other people have. Cool. So is this the, we'll do the reticulation because that's going to take a little bit of time, so we have to do several heatings and picklings, so we'll start with that once that's set up. But maybe while I'm just waiting for those bits and pieces, we'll start through some of the rolling mill textures. So has anyone used a rolling mill before to create texture on their metal? A few people? Yep. So excellent. A lot of really common things that people use to imprint on their metal or impress on their metal are things like fabric or Japanese tissue paper. Dried leaves work really well. So you can find lots of interesting things, anything basically that's quite thin and has areas of like a negative space in it. So you know, areas with height and areas without height will work really, really well. And that's called impressing or imprinting, because we're actually taking that material and under pressure through the rolling mill we're imprinting. So we're creating a depression in our metal. Okay, I'm also going to show you guys embossing, which is where we use a die that's been cut out. So I typically will just use a brass die, something like that, and when we roll that through, that's called embossing, because as we push that into the metal is raising up into the voids here, so that's an emboss. Okay, so that's, when you hear me using those words, that's kind of what I'm talking about. So really getting back to super simple basics, you can actually just use paper, like A4 printer paper, and that will create a texture. So because I am feeling very festive this month, I like to start early, even though it's only November and not December. I'm going to theme a lot of this around like Christmassy stuff, but obviously it translates into any design that you want to make. So I have just cut out some paper here into a little Christmas star, and no, I am not very good with a stencil. I am just on a very small scale doing that little craft project that probably everybody did in grade 1, where you got a paper doily and folded it up and cut into it. So I'm just taking a little bit of paper, folding it in half, and then into quarters, and then into eighths. And then you can just use a pair of scissors and, oh sorry, it's okay. You can use a pair of scissors to just cut that up into whatever kind of a pattern you like. So you're creative people, I'm sure that you can make something really exciting if you put your minds to it. But yeah, just a couple of little cuts, and open it up and you've got a little pattern of some description. Okay, so you know, just depending on where you put the cuts, you're going to get totally different shapes and things. So when you run that through the roller, you will take your metal. So I've got some sheets of aluminium here, and it's best to anneal that metal before you run it through the roller, okay? So you'll get a much better impression if that is annealed. This metal that I have here is not annealed, so I'm going to just show you one running it through annealed, and then I'll show you one running it through not annealed, so you can kind of like see the difference. And so just bear with me for a tick. Let's use this one to start with. Okay, best when you're running it through a little rolling mill to put it in between two brass plates, okay, and that's going to protect the surface of your rolling mill from the materials that you're running through and any marks that it might leave on there. So you can, if you're using aluminium and brass, you don't probably have to put brass on both sides. You could just run your sandwich like this, because basically it's just that paper or the leaf or the wire or whatever it is that you're running through, that's what you're trying to protect the rolling mill from. Aluminium is not going to do any damage to the mill. So just line it up, make your little sandwich like so, and then bring it over to the mill. Now I've made that ever so slightly. I have like a larger rolling mill. I didn't think about asking what size I'd be using, so you know, it's best where that sheet section is, where that flat section of your roller is, to just kind of cut your pieces to match that. This is a little bit bigger, so it just means that some of it will be getting some weird lines down the side from the square wire section. Alright, now just start opening this up until I can fit all of my metal and my little piece of paper in there. If you had something a little bit thicker that you were putting in there, like say a piece of fabric, for example, you want to make sure that when you insert this in here, at the moment we're just going to be measuring the thickness of that, so you need to make sure that your piece of fabric is definitely in there. Sometimes if you're not paying attention, you might put it in this way and only measure that bit of brass that's sticking out, or you might measure up here but that doesn't have the material which is inside calculated into that. So just make sure that you've definitely got whatever your interior material is inside here when you take your little measurement. So just tighten that up, okay, just so it feels nice and firm. You don't have to like, you know, use all your Hulk strength, but just so it's nice and firm. And then have a look. So depending on what kind of a rolling mill you have, it'll have different markings and measurements on it. We don't need to worry too much about what those are at this stage, but just have a look. So here I can see I'm 1 notch after 0.25. So I'm going to loosen that, pull my piece out, and then I'm going to tighten it back up to 1 notch past 0.25. So that means my rollers are now the exact distance apart that this metal and material are thick. Does that kind of make sense? Yep. Then you need to tighten it a little bit, okay? So I know with these Durston mills that 5 little notches is a good like tightening amount for running this through. I know at uni, I can't remember what kind of mill that is, but it only needs to go 2 notches because it's using a different like system of measurement on here. So when you go home to do this with your own rolling mill or at the club or whatever, you might have to do a few little experiments first to see kind of how tight you need to roll it through. And it is a little bit hit and miss with different materials. So you might find An embossing die, you don't need to run through the mill with quite as much pressure as you need to run a leaf through the rolling mill to get the same kind of level of impression. So it's always good before you do your actual piece, you know, if you're going to use a piece of silver or something like that and you're going to imprint this lovely pattern on it, before you go and spend 70 bucks on a piece of silver, run it through and you don't get a very good impression, do a little test piece on some copper, you know, and that's something that's much cheaper, and, you know, work out how tight you're going to have it, and then you'll know for next time. So I'm going to tighten that 5 little notches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'll run that through. I'm just going to make sure. So this is the unannealed metal. It's much easier when they're bolted to the floor, and I just don't want to punch you, sorry. There we go, thank you. And I'll just pass that around so you can see the impression that that's left on. That's actually done a pretty decent impression for not being annealed, okay? But you can see on the brass, you only get this very faint shadow, okay? And that's because aluminium is a much softer metal than brass is, and that's why we use brass as our plates on the outside, because they're much harder, so you know, you can run them through several times and then you get a few faint impressions. What you do want to be aware of, however, is if you do get an impression on your brass, on your little outside sheets, that is going to imprint itself on every other piece that you run through. So it's always good to have a bit of like a sort of crappy set of brass plates for doing your experiments and testing how much compression you're going to need. But then when you go to do your actual final piece on that silver or that gold or that whatever metal you're using that's going to be your final piece, start with some fresh unused brass plates so that you don't impart any other textures onto it. Brass is not like that expensive too, so you know, it's usually worth just investing a couple of dollars for some nice clean sheets. Cool, makes sense?
Could you use copper?
As your external sheets? Yeah. You could like in terms of protecting the safety of your rolling mill, absolutely. But because copper is softer than brass, it's just going to pick up those textures more quickly and start to stretch out. So you'll notice this piece that we roll through, as we keep rolling it through, it'll probably start getting more and more curly, like it'll start changing its shape. The easiest way to fix that is just to put it on the ground, stomp on it really hard, and you can sort of flatten it out enough that you can run it through again. If you've got a hydraulic press, you can put it through the hydraulic press and flatten it. If it's getting really curved and it doesn't have a lot of texture and you want to save it, you can anneal it and then run it through the rollers in a few different directions to reflatten it. That's fine too. So whatever kind of works for you. So that is just with normal paper. What I wanted to demo today but couldn't get my hands on were, you know, you can go to like craft stores and buy those little hole punches, and they have got, you know, often delightful Christmas shapes, or, you know, they could be, doesn't have to be Christmassy, it could be letters or anything that you want to use. So if you use those, particularly with some sticky back adhesive paper, and you can stick, you know, so if you wanted to create a little pattern of stars or of spelling out somebody's name or something like that, using the adhesive paper to stick that on will work well. But unfortunately, they didn't sell them at Indooroopilly where I was going, and then the shops don't open here until 9. But you could, it's a little bit harder because this is reasonably thick, but we could do something similar to our little star. Or if you are really good at, and you have the patience for it, you can sit there with a scalpel on a green mat and cut designs out. I personally don't have the patience for that sort of thing. Or if you have access to a laser cutter, it's a great way to, like, you can laser cut paper. I don't know if you can laser cut sticky batch paper, but I assume possibly, I don't know. But even just laser cutting a sheet of normal paper, you know, if you're going to have sort of brass plates to protect it about this size, just cut your paper to the same size as the brass plates, and then you can just have your little laser cut design out. And I know places like on Etsy and eBay, people sell pre-made laser cut pieces of paper with patterns and textures and designs already on them. So, you know, if you're not gung-ho with a computer, which I certainly am not, you know, there are ways that you can access those sheets of paper to run through the rolling mill. Also, if you have any like questions at any stage, please just jump in with those.
Someone said that the cupcake holders have pretty designs.
Oh, cupcake holders?
Yeah, you make a cupcake and you put it in a
Paper.
Oh yes, like kind of like the patty pan, but the fancy ones. Yeah, they would be beautiful. Like paper doilies work really well. Even stickers, like you can go and buy. Sorry.
Letters.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just play around with it. Like, don't be limited by the couple of things I'm going to show you today. Like, that plastic that you were talking about, I think if you could cut into that with a scalpel or with stamps or something like that, that would probably work amazingly in something that you could reuse and reuse. So, you know, give things like that a go. Okay. So I've just done something extra simple because that thick paper is hard to cut, but we can just stick, is that, oh, here we go. So that just means it won't move, okay? So it's going to make that a little bit easier. Pop that in between our brass plates again. And now what we're going to do is we're not going to just re-roll through at the same tension, because rolling that through has thinned out our aluminium, okay? So we have to recalculate that. Typically, you're not going to be just re-rolling and re-rolling onto the same sheet. I'm just doing that because it's a demo, but just to kind of get your heads around that idea of why we have to keep adjusting the thicknesses there.
So you couldn't ever roll anything twice?
No, you could. There's nothing to stop you rolling onto the same piece of metal twice, but you're unlikely to be able to get things to line up perfectly. So if you rolled something through and then it wasn't deep enough, you know, to then put it back on, roll it through again, you're unlikely to get it to line up. And also, some of the materials that you roll through, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that piece of paper you can't really tell so much. You could probably use that again, but
lace does.
Sorry?
Lace material.
Lace, exactly. Leaves, things like that. Like you pull them out and it'll just crumble. It's nothing. It's put under too much pressure. Okay, so open that up. Pop our little sandwich back in. Okay, yeah, so you can see now I'm 2 notches after 500, so it's a little bit different. Pull that out. Oh, sorry? Oh, I did too, didn't I? Oh. Don't mind me. Well, anyway, that's going to be quite different this time. So I was thinking, I was like, geez, that's a lot different. I wouldn't have thought. I thought it was only going to be a few notches. But here we go. Ooh, that way.
Ready?
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to pass that around so you can see that. You'll see there's hardly any impression been made on that.
You didn't turn it 12 notches, did you?
Oh, I don't know. I'm doing a terrible demo right now. Don't mind me. Ugh.
So you know how you adjusted it to 1 and then you said 5. Why not do 6 after the initial one?
Because I don't know how much you could certainly do that and estimate that if I just do it 1 more notch,
Right.
that will account for how much that has compressed. Like,
Right.
but I can't guarantee that this has gone from like 1, like say 6 notches to 5 notches thickness, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, let me just really quickly do that again, but instead of cutting out a beautiful shape, I'm just going to cut out a little line. shouldn't talk so much when I'm doing a demo. Alright, here's our very exciting Christmas line.
Christmas candle.
Nice. So it is very awkward when this is not attached to the bolted down. Thank you. For a really long time where we were renting, we couldn't bolt to the floor, and so I had it bolted to a tabletop, and the table had like bracing, so you'd put my foot on the bracing and my butt up against the edge of the table and be like to run things through the rowing mill. So
I used a really heavy workbench.
yeah. Okay, so
4 or 5 step press works well.
what is it?
Yes, I
4 or 5 step press, about 80 kilos.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to stop peeling that off because that's quite boring. But just pass that around and you can see that thicker adhesive paper has left a deeper impression on that.
Copper light.
The brass plate.
Brass,
You can see, I'll pass that around too, that has left an impression on it, which is not as, which is deeper than the paper impression. So by the end of all of these demos, you'll be really starting to see that brass plate looking a bit cactus. So
Actually, line your brass plate up well, you can use the brass plate as a
absolutely. And so when we start doing, so a really good point actually to move on to our embossing dies. So the embossing dies that I made here, this is just saw pierced out, okay? So I just went online, because I'm terrible at drawing, found a little Merry Christmas, and saw pierced that out. So that will give me a nice impression, but it's not to say that you don't have to pierce through an entire plate to get an embossed texture. So if you have facilities to do etching, so metal etching, you can etch, brass is best because it is so hard, but if you can etch onto a brass plate, like using ferric chloride or something like that, you can use that as an embossing die. It doesn't seem to last quite as long as the saw pierced out ones, but it can give you a really nice effect, and you'll basically get the inverse of the etched plate. So as deep, if you do a very shallow etch, you'll get a very shallow image showing up on the opposite side. If you do a very deep etch, you'll get a deeper image showing up on the other side. You'll also get a mirror image, so just think about that if you're using, like, if text is part of what you want to incorporate into it, so you don't want to have like mirror image text, but it's certainly something you can use. But you can also use things like a texturing hammer and hammer onto a plate and then run that through. You could use your center punch and run that through. You can, if you get a really cool texture on your brass plate from running things through the mill, there's no reason that can't go through. So I've got a really nice texturing plate that I like to use at the moment, where I was taking granules. So when you just melt some scrap, make some granules, and then I wanted to flatten them, so I was just running them through the roller because it meant that I could do like 30 at a time. And then the brass plate that I was using was getting all these really cool random kind of depressions into it, and then you'd run it through again and it would get even more, and then overlay, and so you end up with this really interesting texture in your brass plate. And now I can use that, I wasn't planning to do that, I just saw it and was like, oh, that's really awesome, I'm going to now use that to run through onto other metal and get these very random raised elements on them. So it's really fun. Like, the more you start doing it, the more you'll start just looking at things and thinking, ooh, texture, I can use that. Yeah.
So the brass must be soft to take the impression. So
how many times do you use it before it becomes wax?
Okay, so yeah, sort of yes and no. So in that instance, I didn't anneal it at all because I was using it as a plate to run through. So it was quite hard, and the more times I was running it through, the harder it was getting. So, but yes, after a certain amount of time. So I've only run it through with like other pieces of metal a couple of times, and it's still working quite well. But I might find if I've run it through the roller 20 times, it's going to start to flatten out. And if you looked at it, every time you used it, it would be slightly less texture that you're getting every time. But probably for the first 10 or 20 times, you can't really tell too much, and then you'll start noticing it. With these ones, yes, it gets distorted every time. So that Merry Christmas, after we've rolled it through 10 times, is going to be this sort of stretched out Merry Christmas and look a little bit weird. But, you could get quite a few from that brass plate. So they're not, forever things. If you wanted to, you could buy some tool steel and you could, I don't think anyone enjoys saw piercing into steel, but you can. So you could saw pierce into a thin sheet of tool steel, and that would last a lot longer. So if you were wanting to do it for production, so if you were like, nah, I need 100 of these, you just have to weigh up what's going to take more time, saw piercing out one steel blanking die that I can get 100 impressions of, or really quickly saw piercing out 5 brass blanking dies. So you just got to decide which way you want to go with that. Okay, so that is paper running through. Another thing that you can use instead of paper, but still is paper, is sandpaper. So if you kind of want that really gritty surface that you're going to get with sandblasting, you can just literally cut out pieces of sandpaper and run that through. So if you want a large sheet, this is what I was talking about before when I mentioned that sort of like cheap way to get a sandblasted finish. You can just run it like an entire sheet, pop a piece of sandpaper on, run that through, and you'll get a whole piece that looks like it's been sandblasted or similar to sandblasting. And if you use a very coarse, like say, you can get that glass sandpaper, it's yellow, it says like 0 and 00, you can run it through with that and you'll get a very deep, super gritty kind of texture showing up on your metal. You could run it through with some 400 sandpaper and you'd just get a matte kind of a finish on there. You could do something in between and you get something that's a little bit more sort of matte sandblast finish. So
if you had a piece of aluminium,
yes,
and you just say you put stickers of different heights
mm-hmm.
through the embossing thing, the ones that are higher are going to have a deeper impression, is that right?
Yes. Now what sometimes happens with that, is a really good question actually, is that the higher ones will prevent, like they will act as a barrier, like a height barrier to those thin ones actually making an impression. So I think if you were to say put some of this sticky paper and some of that plain paper in together, you'd probably get away with it and you'd have some deeper impressions and some lighter impressions. But you notice it especially when you use like say a really thick woven fabric, like a jute, something like that. When you roll it through, instead of getting lines this way and lines this way, you often get a series of dots, because all it's picking up is where those weaves, exactly where that junction is, and it's thick, so it just impresses that, but we're not compressing it enough that we also get all those lines. Whereas if you put something thinner like muslin or cheesecloth through, then you get the lines running this way and the lines running this way, because where they junction over, it's not really that thick. So does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So I think it would be something that you could experiment with as to like what that thickness, kind of what the ratio is that you could get away with. So if you had some really thick foil stickers, see if they are going to stop the paper that's next to them impressing as well. So it's just a little bit of an experimentation there.
But in all cases you need to be in the fully annealed condition?
You'll get a better impression if it's annealed. So like you can see that piece of aluminium that we passed around there, thank you, you are still getting an impression, and that's sort of pretty much the impression that you're going to get with paper. You might get a slightly deeper one, and that's because aluminium is soft. But if you wanted that level of impression on a piece of brass, you'd have to anneal that brass to be able, otherwise you just get this little like whisper of a pattern on it, and it's not enough. So
How does it work on silver and gold?
beautifully. So 9 carat, because it has such a high brass content anyway, is the same thing. Like, it's harder, so you're not going to get as good an impression. 18 carat, you'll get a beautiful impression. Sterling silver fine, so we get lovely impressions with those. But I still would say anneal them first. You'll get your best impression.
Have you ever worked in platinum?
I've never rolling milled with platinum. I don't think I could afford that, mate. That'd be lovely, but yeah. I think if I wanted like an impression like that on platinum, I'd make a silver mock-up and then have it and mold made and get it cast, because the wastage that you'd have would just be like way too much money. I mean, if you're loaded, go for it. I'm not fussed, but
Platinum was cheaper than gold the other day.
the world is back to funny. To be fair, I don't use a lot of gold unless it's a commission either, because I just don't have that much money. Okay, so sorry, back to the sandpaper. So this is really cool because you can kind of get that sort of sandblast impression just in a pattern or a section. There's no reason you couldn't cut that sandpaper out into other shapes or use a stamp, like a hole punchy thing to do it as well. The other option though, flip it, is we can use a sandblaster and mask off areas of our surface. Okay, so this is obviously you're going to get when we roll it through, that sandblast pattern imprinted on there. If we wanted to flip that, you could put, like, you know, cut that out of paper or glue that on, use sticky adhesive paper and stick it on, put it into the sandblaster, and then you're going to be protecting the surface that's covered and sandblasting all the other surface. Does that kind of make sense? So you can get the sandblast on most of it with a little bit that's going to stay shiny mirror finish, or you can roll this through. So let's roll this through to see what that looks like.
I have never annealed aluminium.
Yeah.
What do you look for when you do that?
Really? Oh, that's good. Well, actually, we might be able to do a little demo of it right
Aluminium
now.
doesn't change colour, so that's one of the things. You don't have any colour indication. You want to take it to about 160 to 180 degrees centigrade to anneal it.
No fire scale either.
Sorry?
No fire scale either.
I mean, the only, with aluminium, you're a little bit limited because you can't solder it because it has such a low melt point. But in saying that, you can do lots of great cold joining, and because it's so light, so if you want to make a huge pair of earrings, aluminium's perfect because you can get away with a big size there. Or if you want to make giant Christmas tree ornaments, as we are themed Christmas today, you know, you can do it without breaking the branches off your tree and costing you a fortune. So to anneal your aluminium, where's a piece we've got here? What I need, actually, that we might not have, which I didn't think to bring, is a little, like a toothpick or a back of a matchstick. Or a bit of soap works as well. Sorry? Piece of paper might not quite work. I might just... If we can't do the demo, I'll basically...
Water. Do you need water?
No, I won't need any water. Oh, well, maybe not for this demo. So the way that I anneal aluminium is to heat it with a torch and then have a matchstick or a skewer or a toothpick or something. And as you're heating it, just run that across the surface. And when it leaves a charcoal carbon mark on your aluminium, you know it's reached the right temperature. So some people also use soap for the same thing. So you can just rub a piece of soap on, and as you're heating it, you'll kind of see that burn away. I've never actually done it with the soap. I've just heard people say they do it with the soap. I've always just done it with a piece of timber. We could probably use this if we wanted, but I don't know. They'll get cranky.
It's got enough scars on
Sorry?
it. It's got enough scars on it.
Yeah, I think you could probably handle it. I'll see if I have a toothpick or not. If you don't, that's okay. Andrew, could I use the corner of your bench paper? Thank you. Alright, let's give it a go with this. We'll see. I don't know if it's a bit waxed or anything, but give it a go. And how do I always have trouble with this torch. Is that it? There we go. So, we just heat that up. And then you could run that. No, it's not leaving any marks. This might take a little while because it's a pretty small torch and a big piece of aluminium, but we'll give it a red hot go. Oh, there's that red hot go again. I do see that a lot. Hard to see that flame under these lights. I don't know if other people use them, but you can buy from pottery supplies refractory bricks, and they're quite good to use as a brick like this because they don't pull any heat away. So I think they're only about like $10 from pottery supply places, so they're not bad, especially when you are annealing, or otherwise, you know, like people have seen probably those pumice turntables are quite good as well. So I think this might just take a little while. Usually it wouldn't, if you had a bigger flame and probably a more like heat reflective brick, you might get this done a bit quicker. So just be aware of.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, actually, that'd be good.
Take a second one on.
Keep it going.
Thanks. Ooh, double up. That's better. I like these orca torches. Oh, it's almost leaving a carbon mark there. So can you guys, I don't know, you probably can't quite see, it's getting close because there's a faint little carbon mark that's being left.
See that it's trying to colour.
Okay. There we go, so you can see that nice charcoal mark. Okay. How do I turn this off?
Pull that back
That's
there.
it? Do I have to press anything else?
That's it. No, no.
Torch always scares me, I don't know, not used to that one. So that, with the aluminium, I wouldn't quench it, I just let that air cool, and so I'll just leave it there, and then we can come back and we can actually use that. What's not a bad idea before you run things through the roller is, you know, especially if you're going to just be cold joining it afterwards, you can get that plate nice and polished up, because once you've got that texture on there, you can do a little bit of polishing, like so I would maybe do like a final polish, something like that, just a really light one with a nice soft mop to get it nice and shiny, but you don't want to have to be removing scratches or you know, charcoal marks, things like that. Usually it's best if you can get it to, you know, maybe go to triply, something like that first. Even if it felt really keen, you could take it up to a high polish, then run it through the roller, do your cutting, do your edges, do all the anything like that that you need to do to it, and then all you have to do is a really light final polish.
Do you polish your plates as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you buy them, I mean, these are a bit cactus, but you know, when you buy them and they have the plastic, you peel the plastic off them, at that stage they're usually pretty good. I wouldn't really worry about polishing those back. But yeah, if you were using some brass plates that you'd just pulled out from your drawer and they've been banging around, maybe they've got a little bit of tarnish on them, you know, it wouldn't be a bad plan to do that. However, just throw all of that out the window if you are going to be doing any soldering and things to it, because if you're doing it onto silver and then you're going to be soldering, you're going to have fire scale and things like that to deal with, you're probably going to have to give it a much better polish
Sticky
anyway.
paper you pull off of those brass plates and that
Yeah.
is best to wipe them over with, clean them with methylated spirits. It's because there's a slight oil.
A little bit of sticky oil
There's
there.
oil in it.
Good
yeah,
hint.
just ordinary oil.
I like that. Okay. So did everyone hear that? Method to when after you pull off the sticky back stuff. What are my words? I've got like the verbal dyslexia going on
A
today.
lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, no, I've never done that before, so I like
A
that.
lot
That's
of people
great.
don't know that there is that real thin of oil. You don't even feel it, but it's there, and
Makes a difference.
it does. Yeah.
Like that. Okay, adding that to the
Acetone sends you on a
acid.
better trip.
Sorry?
Acetone sends you on a better trip.
But sometimes acetone's a bit harsh for some things.
What I might do while we've got the torches and things out is just start that reticulation process. So I know this is very like back and forth a little bit, guys, so sorry, just I apologise that we're going all over the place. I never sort of stick to one demo and go in a coherent manner. So with our reticulation, what we're doing, has people reticulated before? Might be, most people have, some people haven't, accidentally.
No.
Okay, so reticulation is basically that process where you heat the metal to the point where it's starting to melt, particularly on the surface, and then as it contracts you get these lovely ripples or spots or sparkles, or you know, sometimes it looks like the surface of the moon, it can be all sorts of things. Usually most people have done it at least once before on their silver accidentally, when you just heat it a little bit too much when you're soldering. But if you want to do, if you want to use it within your work, I would suggest to go, like, instead of doing it accidentally, going through like a process to get that, so that you get a really nice finish. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to heat it, and when we heat it, it's bringing that layer of fine silver up to the surface. That's why it goes white. Then we're going to put it into the pickle. That's going to strip out a layer of copper from the surface so that we get a nice layer of fine silver on the surface. And then we repeat that process, usually about 7 times is quite good, okay? And so we get a really nice thick layer of fine silver on the surface of your metal, okay? And then on the last go, we'll heat it up a little bit more so that we start to get that melting happening. We get those ripples and those contractions and all that beautiful texturization on the surface. And because we've raised up all of that fine silver, we can just burnish that metal then. So you can burnish it in a tumbler, you can burnish it with a like a wire brush, anything that's just going to be burnishing the surface, not polishing it. And then that way we don't have to worry about fire scale, because it has this lovely thick layer of fine silver that's covering any fire scale, any like copper content that could be hiding and lurking under the surface, okay? So it's a really good plan to go through that. Otherwise you find if you just go, oh no, whatever, I'll just melt it this first go, you often find you get that real purpley fire scale tinge to it, okay? So you don't get that lovely silvery brightness that you would otherwise get. So that is, if you have accidentally reticulated something, but you love it and you want to make it part of your piece, no problem, let's go backwards and don't heat it up so far that you're going to melt it again, but we're just taking it basically to annealing temperature, so we can anneal it and then pickle it 7 times. You'll get that nice thick layer of fine silver. Then when you burnish it, you get that lovely surface on your metal. Okay, does that kind of make sense? Sorry, Andrew, do you have some pickle and flux I could pinch, please? Thank you. So for me, in lighting conditions like this, the best way to test that you are taking that metal just to about annealing temperature and not too much further. To be honest, I'm not too stressed when it's reticulation. If you go a little bit too much, it's not the end of the world, considering you're going to be melting it at the end anyway. But I'll just put a little dab of flux on. When that flux glazes, so it becomes nice and clear, and you can see that white metal underneath, then you know that the metal's reached the right temperature. You can take the torch off, pop it into the pickle, and you'll be good to go, okay? If you've got sort of more natural lighting conditions, or if you've got yourself a nice little like charcoal kind of oveny box thing that you can pop your metal in, then it's much more easy to look at the metal and tell when you're reaching the right kinds of pinks and things like that. Not great. I generally don't do it that way anyhow, but if you're wanting to minimize your use of flux, that's a good way to do it. But you can just put a little wee dab in the center. You don't need to coat the whole thing with flux. As long as you're heating the piece nice and evenly, you'll be able to see it get up to that temperature. So I'll heat these up. No, I'm waiting for the flux. Once. Does anyone have any questions while we're waiting?
Do you heat pickle up at all?
Definitely. So I use citric acid for my pickle because it's a more safer, more natural alternative to using like hydrochloric or sulfuric acid, something like that. And it works quite well for me, but it only really works hot. So I would always have my pickle hot. I just have a like a 2-burner kind of electric hot plate with Pyrex dish on top.
I got a crock pot.
Yeah.
I put water in it, put the pickle in the jar, and I'll bring it up and get it hot. Make a pickle pot, and then drop the stuff into it.
Yeah. Perfect.
Clean up.
Yeah. And
That's why I asked, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people just drop it straight in the cold pickle.
Yeah, I just find that cold, like, even when you're using like hydrochloric acid or something like that for your pickle, it works better hot. Like you can use it cold, and you can often, if you strengthen the solution a little bit, but I think it's much better working warm. And sorry, what's your name? Esmond. So as I was kind of saying, that idea of using a crock pot's really good, and doing it in a water bath, because previously I've had a crock pot and just put the pickle straight into it, and after about like 6 months to a year, you sort of start to notice, you might have noticed this already if you've done it, like you get this kind of green crusty crystals happening everywhere, and then the whole thing just carks it. But yeah, like you say, putting it in a water bath,
I just bought one from the cheap shop.
Lasts much longer.
Second-hand
Yeah,
shop.
it's perfect, and that'll
put
last
the water
forever.
in, then the jar in, put pickle in it.
Yeah.
And just have the water come up just past the top of your pickle.
So it's really good solutions for pickle. I know lots of people use other natural things like vinegar and salt. I haven't actually tried that, but it's supposed to be quite good.
It works.
Yeah.
So you used to use it, we were doing red hot metal straight into the pickle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it works great on that.
Yeah.
But it's not as effective as commercial Sulfate. It's about 3 or 4 times longer. But yeah, so, just a cup of vinegar, have a spoon of salt. When the salt dissolves, throw some more salt in it. So it's a saturated salt solution.
Cool. I like it.
Yeah.
Slower. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't have to then deal with fumes or have extraction
Well, I
or
had
things
little
like that.
kids.
Yeah.
It's safer.
Exactly. And like citric acid, I use that just because it's easy, and you can buy it like just in bulk from the shops and just chip in the granules and mix it up. So if anybody's interested in using that, it's just 75 grams of citric acid to a litre of water, and you can buy little 75-gram jars from Coles. But like in the baking section, just using jams and things like that. But you can buy it a lot cheaper if you buy it in bulk from like you know those delis that are in West End, like what would you call it, like bulk kind of deli places. They often sell like you can get like a kilo bag or half kilo bag for $3, so it's a lot cheaper.
Is it 75 grams to a litre?
To a litre, yeah. And because it's not a chemical where you have to worry about fumes and things coming off it, you can be pretty blasé. Like I don't tend to always measure it. I'll just kind of be like, oh, about that much, or just sort of pour in what's left in the bag. If it stops working very well, then I can put a little bit more citric acid in. You can get it to last a little bit longer.
I know the glaze on pots cracked, and the pickle's going through and crusted on the outside.
Yeah, so doing that water bath idea kind of just prevents that, because you can just put it in Pyrex or a beaker or something like that. It also works really well if anybody uses like liver of sulfur or garden lime, things like that, to oxidize the surface of your metal. Because it works best when it's hot, but if you're oxidizing lots of stuff, even if you sort of pour in boiling water after about 5 or 10 minutes and it cools down, you notice it's not working as well. If you just put that beaker or jar or whatever it is that you're using into a bath of water, so you could do it in the crock pot, you could do it in a saucepan on the stove, that will last a lot longer. If it's hot, it'll keep going. You can also put like a little lid, like the beakers you buy here, and they've got a little blue lid that makes them airtight. If you put your sulfur in that, it tends to, like that not being exposed to the oxygen, you can get that to last out a little bit longer as well. in saying that, you know, you're using like a drop with some water every time. So, and does everybody know that if you're using a liver of sulfur from here, if you let that, you know, if you let it sit for a day or two, it goes clear, it doesn't work anymore. That becomes sulfur that you can use on your garden. So things like blueberries and acid-loving plants are really like keen for sulfur. So instead of going out and buying like garden sulfur to use on your garden, and then also using sulfur in your jewelry studio, you can use it for both. All right, let's just hold off on
A
this.
little bit late. You mentioned you were talking about etching when I walked
Yes,
in.
yeah.
What do you use to mask out
For etching?
Wax?
Different things, so it depends what kind of a result I want. So if I want something that's very detailed, usually I'll use press and peel, which is the blue paper. You can buy it from computer supply shops and like JCar, and it's a you run it through, you can print onto it with a laser printer. It has to be a laser printer, and you can then iron transfer that onto your metal. So if you want to do, I don't know, like text or something, but you're not very good at writing or drawing, you know, you could just take a font from the computer, print that out onto the paper, iron it on, and then that creates a resist. I sometimes will use hard ground, so what printmakers use, paint that on, and then you can get a really like illustrative effect. So you could just use your scribe, works really well to cut into that. You can use a pin, you can use like a toothpick or something like that if you want something a bit thicker. You can go into that. A really nice natural alternative is beeswax painted onto it. Thank you so much. Oh, here's press and peel. So they sell it here as well. Sorry, not just at JCar. My bad. Obviously, you should buy it from Australian Jeweller Suppliers. But yeah, so beeswax works well, but it's a little bit harder to see on the metal, and you do want to make sure that you go all the way, like cut into the wax, so you don't want to leave a thin little film of it. What else?
You can beeswax from the metal you melted.
You'll melt it in a pod painted on with a paintbrush. Yeah, yeah. So, like if you were amazing with a paintbrush, you could use a really fine paintbrush, dip it in and kind of paint onto it. Or what I usually do is use it a bit more like hard ground and paint the whole surface and scratch back into it. But it depends again with etching what you want to be the high point and what you want to be the low point. Like, do you want the entire background to be etched away, or do you want the image to be etched into the metal? Does that kind of make sense? This is a bit hard to explain when we're not looking at pieces of etched material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marking pen.
Sorry?
Marking pen.
Yeah, marking pens.
Red pen's best. Red pen's the best one.
Oh,
But
interesting.
red Staedtler pen is the best. It's the most resistant to the. I've done a little bit of etching,
Excellent.
and that PNP paper. If you use an HP printer, laser printer, that seems to work the best. And also, you can apparently put that on, because I sometimes had trouble putting that on. I used it a little bit.
Yeah.
And you can apparently put it through a laminator. You can actually put the metal through, and
Oh,
apparently
cool.
that's you are responsible for that. You told me about that.
I like that.
Depending on the
Laminator.
laminator, you'll have to
Because
run
they're
it
cheap.
through
They're quite
several
cheap,
times,
those
so-
laminators, and they'll
so-
handle it if you
exactly.
put a piece of metal through.
I had a student use a hair straightener. So the student have an iron. This is Gen Y. We don't have irons, but we have hair straighteners.
Yes.
So, so you just was holding it in the sort of two paddles of the hair straightener, and that worked really well. Like, I mean, obviously she could only do really small things because it was little.
Yeah, because if you've got
about
a
that
big piece,
big,
you've
but-
got to get it pretty
Yeah.
hot. You know, if you've got a big piece of metal.
Yeah,
You know.
but I've also found if you're having trouble with your iron, obviously make sure your metal's lovely and flat. But if you just put a little bit of fabric underneath it, so don't do it onto your hard work surface. Do it onto like a towel or even a tea towel. It doesn't get too thick, and that seems to help as well. So it just gives you a little bit of flexibility as your iron's kind of rocking around. And then just make sure you drop it straight into some cold water afterwards, and then it peels off quite well. Oil-based marker pens are also very good for touching up. So sometimes I find it's usually because you've had a little speck of dust or something that you didn't quite clean off, and you get this little like bit where it didn't press down, so you can just use an oil-based marker pen to touch that up, or on the edges of your metal as well. So you can get a beautiful etched texture on the edge if you just leave them plain. I love that. Usually I'll prefer that, but if you do want to save your metal nice crisp edges, just paint a little bit of that. It has to be an oil-based marker pen. I found just a Sharpie doesn't work. and that quite looks. But I like this
Yeah,
red.
the red does work well.
Did you say stylo?
And the other thing that's Stadler, yeah.
Oh, Stadler.
Yeah. And
Is
the
it like
other
an inky pen or the ballpoint pen? I'm
no, just the ink
Just
one,
the
the felt
inky
one.
pen? Yep.
The red definitely stays on better. And the other thing that's really good for the back of something is just that good brown parcel tape.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are, most people when they etch here using like chemicals or using electric etching.
Oh, okay.
Never done any? Oh, sorry. And for those people who haven't done etching, sorry if this went off on a really huge tangent.
Yeah, yeah.
But electric etching, so you can buy kits, and this is how I've moved over to this from chemical etching, because chemical etching, the chemicals, they're not very good for the environment or for your health, but they also have a life. So you know, after several uses, they kind of get saturated or like, they sort of stop working. So you can buy Electro Edges. The one that I have is Sherry Harb is the brand, and it's a small.
She writes books.
Yes. So she's got a little sort of steel dish. Just forgive my lack of like terminology here. She's got like a little, maybe like a rectifier. I don't know what it's called. It's got two, like a red and a black alligator clip.
Yeah.
Rectifier,
Is
yeah.
it rectifier? Yeah. See, I don't know these ones.
Power supply.
Yeah, power supply. And an anode. So you click the black onto the pan. You have a little anode that you sticky tape onto the back of the piece that you want to etch, and then you use your red clip onto the other end of your anode, and you suspend it into a solution of silver nitrate. So silver, it's still a chemical, but it's a much safer chemical. It's the sort of stuff that they use in antibiotic creams for burns and things like that, but at a different solution. So you still don't want to like at the solution. You still wear gloves and you still wear safety glasses. But the benefit of it is after you have etched, you can pour it through a coffee filter, collect all of those grains of silver that have come out. They can be sent away to get refined. Obviously, once you have enough to make that worthwhile, and then all of that chemical you can be saved and reused, and it sort of has like an infinite life. So it just
Very costly though.
Is it that much more costly? Like, I think I paid about $300 for the whole kit, and I pay about $80 to get ferric chloride, like for a bottle of that. So if you think, yes, it's more expensive in the short term, but after you've been etching for probably 3 years.
How much for a chloride you bought?
Sorry?
How big a bottle? J-Carb bottle, I cost about $20 last time I bought it.
Oh,
Yeah,
see,
how
this is
far
why
that?
I have
I
trouble.
think it was about
I buy
10
things
years
from
ago.
like the science, like science essentials, and sometimes I find that if you're buying things through the university supplier, they just it must just be because they put a big.
What about
cost
copper
markup.
sulfate?
I've not used copper sulfate before, so how?
Didn't you have something in that last demo? They had some up on the bench.
That might have been what AGS is selling, and maybe we did use that. I think so. You typically have used like ferric chloride for copper and brass, and ferric nitrate for silver. Is that what you guys have? You guys? So they probably just have another chemical solution that I might have only just used for the demo, which probably obviously worked well if it worked for the demo, and I just don't remember anything about it. So.
Yeah, we've used ammonium persulfate for copper and brass etching, which gives you a copper sulfate solution, which when you apply a current will actually etch your silver.
Awesome. Cool.
Well, etch silver
Say
quicker.
hello again.
It'll etch it slowly.
Ammonium persulfate.
So we sell it
Ammonium
we've got a copper etching kit which includes the paper, the ammonium persulfate, and we sell that. So that'll etch your copper and brass as well, but once you've etched copper with it, the resulting solution is copper sulfate. And copper sulfate, which is a gardening chemical, you use it for weeding, etc. You can buy it from hardware stores if you just want to do that. That will actually etch silver. It'll do it really, really, really slowly on its own. Apply a current, and it happens quite quick.
And there's no reason, I guess you can just go to J-Car and put like a little 9-volt, you can buy those little 9-volt battery things with 2 little alligator clips and just do it yourself for pretty cheap, if you're handy with those
So what
sorts of
voltage
things.
is this kit?
Sorry?
What voltage is the little kit running?
Oh, you just plug it into the wall? So wall voltage? I don't know.
You'll kill yourself if it's wall voltage at the alligator for the bed.
Okay, well I don't know what the little rectifier box thing does. I don't know, it might sound it. I don't get into the scientific side of things. It has like a little low and high voltage like clip. That's about as technical as it gets. Low for small pieces, high for big pieces. Mystery of like whatever it's doing in between the wall and the clips. I don't know about that. Beyond my ken. So, all right. Excellent. We have our pickle. So I'm going to start heating those.
You need a lighter for that.
Pieces. Oh, okay. So I'll have to light. Well, these are pretty small pieces, so I can probably just use this one. Have you a little? Oh, here's a little wee paintbrush. Bless.
You're feeling creative.
Oh, thank you. I know that there's like pasty flux below this liquid, but I just can't quite get it with my tiny. There we go. So if you are using, I don't know, do most people use paste fluxes or most people using borax and a cone? Paste.
Most using the liquid stuff from here.
Oh, liquid stuff. Nice.
That's borax.
So you can use whatever you want. I'm just going to pull this out the way. Less.
The next time there's a bit of paste stuck up underneath the liquid, I think.
Thank you. What was I up to? Lighting this.
Push the button.
Nice. Getting the hang of that.
You get used to your own torch, don't you?
Yeah. So if you haven't annealed using like paste flux before, you can see it kind of goes a browny colour first. Obviously the outer edge where I don't have the flux is oxidizing, that's fine. And if you look at the colour of the flux, you'll see it going from that browny colour, it'll become clear. But I'm just making sure I'm not only putting my torch where that bit of flux is, because I want to make sure it's nice and evenly heated. I might swap over to the bigger torch. Thank you. So you can see that's nice and clear now. If I pull that up, I've probably actually taken that a little bit further, but does anyone have the time? Are we going with the time? So what I might do is just anneal these once, and then let's everyone imagine that we have annealed them 7 times. And then I'll go through that little reticulation process with you so you can see. But just bearing in mind that you'll get a better result if you do go through those.
Sure, you mentioned before, but why didn't you fully flux it?
Just to use less flux, really.
That's
so
all.
yeah. Like you could just use a tiny little bit of flux on there, and as long as that one little bit is kind of going.
So you're just using flux as a guide.
It's just like a temperature, exactly, temperature indicator precisely.
Reticulate that without annealing.
No, I will pickle it first. I'm just, sorry?
How thick is that?
I think it's just 0.5. I just grabbed some out of my drawer. Looks like 0.5. I didn't measure it. I don't know if it's because I'm on this brick. I'm not really quite used to this brick. But it seems to be doing weird things to my flux. But I think...
You're cooking it a fair bit.
Yeah, it got a lot of heat, so I'm going to say it's should likely be annealed, but the flux has gone a bit weird. I just realised I also don't have a pair of gloves.
I was reading in a book, enamel.
Sorry?
I was reading a book on enamel.
Yeah.
They just said heat your metal up to a fire scale, pickle it, and just keep doing that repeatedly until it stops fire scaling.
Yeah, and that'll be the exact same process of deplete. It's called depletion gilding, right? So it's you're raising up the silver, you're stripping away the copper, and yeah, so like literally, yeah, you could just sit here and be like, okay, if you had, especially if you had a nice, fresh, hot pickle, like works really well. So heat it, quench it, pickle it, take it out, like 30 seconds later, heat it, quench it, pickle it, heat it, quench it, pickle it, blah, 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 blah. And you'll get that really nice thick layer. I'm just letting that cool a little bit because it's not a great idea to put hot metal into pickle because it'll spray up, you know, fine particles of hydrochloric acid into your face or whatever. I'm not sure what our pickle is.
So really, in essence, you're turning sterling into pine.
On the surface.
On the surface,
On
yeah,
the surface.
yeah,
Surface.
yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to worry about doing those two pieces because it's really boring to watch and that was taking a long time. Let that cool a little bit more. While we're waiting, let's run through one of these brass blanking dies so you can see what that is about. Oh, I never did the sandpaper one. Sorry guys, I'm all over the shop. So as you might have realised, I'm not the most organised soul in the world, but you know, get through it. So if I'm not making sense in any stage, just stop me and ask me to repeat things.
Really creative people seldom are.
Sorry,
Really creative people seldom are.
Nobody talks to me for a
That's
second.
all that matters.
So what you say?
Evil. Okay. Thank you. Pass that around. You can see that lovely sort of almost sparkly texture that you get. Bearing in mind, I didn't polish that aluminium before. You know, if I was an organised person, I would have come to the demo with lovely polished pieces of metal.
No, the door would have been open so you can get rid.
Sorry?
The door would have been open so you can get rid.
Exactly. I was fully intending to polish all of my metal before class started, but Andrew was late, so it's his fault. Sorry? Yeah, bloody traffic. Actually, today I did the opposite, where I got here even earlier than normal because I forgot that it's Saturday and there's no peak hour on Saturday, so I allowed a lot more time than I usually did to get down Corrie Drive. Now, what was I showing you with this? I've lost my mind. Good remembering. If you would like to be my life secretary, I would not say no. I actually have just started a business partnership with one of my friends, and so we're going to do all of our sort of commercial and production pieces together. And it's just perfect because she is so organised and so onto things and I'm hopeless, but I can just sit at the bench all day and make stuff, so we're working very well together. She's my jewellery wife. So.
I need 2 of them.
2 would be good, yeah. I wouldn't complain. If anybody else would like to join in like a polyamorous jewellery relationship, I'm open. Sorry, bad joke. Yeah. So I'm just cutting a piece of coarser sandpaper than that. I'm going to run that through so you can see what that looks like. Now, a little bit of, let's do our annealed aluminium, and I might run that through at the same time as a piece of paper, okay? And then we can see, you know, that different depth we're going to get with our annealed metal. Oh no, I'll do it on another piece because these embossing dies tend to give you a really good result. So I don't think, you know, if we're going to have an unannealed thing, did you want it on the annealed piece?
It's just causing shit.
Getting the wooden spoon.
I'm very stirrable. I, you know, had a brother growing up and it didn't seem to like inure me to that. It just made me very extra open to stirring. This is so smooth and beautifully oiled. Mine is not, and it's like, really gotta give it a go. That's delightful. Okay, 1 before 375. Oh, one little thing. Hang on, this is where a lot of people go wrong with running this through. We don't have anything particularly thick in there, so usually we only have to give it a bit of a quarter turn or something to pull it out. But sometimes you've got like weird things, or your brass plates are really curly and compressed, and sometimes you really have to open that up a lot to be able to yank your brass plates out. And what can accidentally happen is if you go like a full revolution around and then a couple of full revolutions around, and you don't take note of how many full revolutions you've done, you'll be at like 1 before 0.375, but those rollers can be at totally different depths. That sort of makes sense. I know that's a bit like verbally confusing, so I'm just going to show you what I mean. So I'm 1 before 375 on there. I'm going to open it up, and I've gone all the way around to 0.375 again. I'm going to pull it out, but then if I just close it a little bit, that's not going to work. So I have to remember to go all the way
to go
back.
the other direction.
Exactly. Oh, did I just do that wrong?
Yeah.
I can't talk and rolling mills don't know. Okay, open it all the way up. No, I'm glad that you told me it would look stupid if it went through. Okay, we're back. 0.375. I'm going to go a full revolution. Then I'm going to go the right way. Turn that all the way back a full revolution. And then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notches tighter. Okay. Did I go the right way? No. Hold on, let's just...
This is what you get for staring at.
Get to see if I
Yes, that's forward.
No. Truly, if it's bolted to the ground, you'll be like, whee! And it's quite straightforward.
Use 2 hands on it there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm
It's a
gonna...
bit thicker that
You can
time.
see the difference that's made to the shape of the metal because we really have stretched it out. So I'll pass that around. So a combination probably, leave that bit on, of that nice annealed metal, and we've also used a coarser sandpaper here, so you're getting a different impression. And then have a little look, if I pass that around, so remember this one and this one is the annealed and the unannealed metal. You can see the difference in that impression that you're going to get. It's really, like with that paper, that's quite nice on that unannealed metal. Maybe that's all the impression that you want. Maybe you don't have to anneal it. And maybe if you're using silver and you get it supplied to you soft, like, you can ask for it soft, that's great, no fire scale. You don't have to like start heating it up and things. So, have a think about it, like, and what the other steps you're going to be doing are. And if you can avoid heating it up, I would, that's always awesome. But, generally speaking, you will have to anneal that metal. Okay, Merry Christmas.
Behind the sandpaper.
Could be that I did, but I think I put it in the middle.
You put it
I
back
don't
about here.
Yeah, maybe I did only. Who knows? Yeah. I generally find, like, it's a bit hard to know with this one, but with mine, I'll know if I've made a mistake when I start to roll it, because if it's really hard, just stop. Like, you go, okay, I've done something wrong, I've wound it too much, I've measured in the wrong bit, something's gone wrong. Likewise, if you're like, whee, it's just you have something else has gone wrong. So it should just generally be like, ugh, like, it's a little bit of oomph to it, but it's not like, okay? So probably...
If you need too strong wind to turn the handle, you might actually break some of the gears on the machine.
Yeah, exactly. And when it's not bolted to the floor, maybe it's a little bit hard to tell if it's which way it's going, but yeah, if it's really hard or really easy, there's probably been an error made somewhere in that. Now, where's my other piece of aluminium? Here we go.
It's just like the aluminium you get at Bunnings.
It is, just like the aluminium you get at Bunnings, but this is the aluminium that I just got from uni because I'm a student there and I'm doing my master's there at the moment, and it is really easy for me to buy small pieces from there as opposed to buying like giant sheets from
I
Bunnings.
was thinking like roof flashing, which comes in a roll. Just roll it out.
Awesome. I mean, like, honestly, it doesn't... wherever. This is I think 0.8 aluminium, so I think the stuff at Bunnings is 1 mil. That's fine. Like that stuff works great. It's so light, and if you like, you know, you might need to use like aviation shears, or if you've got access to a big guillotine or a big set of bench shears, that's cool. Like cut it up, go for gold. I'm just lazy, so.
You also got to straighten it out.
So how much did that cost you, that little bit?
Probably like 20 cents. I don't actually know off the top of my head. So the technician who works there, who's super lovely, I just pulled up and was like, can I please have this? And I'm just going to come in and pick it up in my car. Okay, so first of all, make sure you've got your blanking die facing the right way, because nothing worse than doing what I just did and putting it on and you have Merry Christmas backwards, which will not look very good at all. So just make sure you've got that facing the right way. All we have is aluminium and brass, so you don't need to worry about putting it in between rollers to run it through. So I'll line it up. I'm a little bit like, oh, I hope it fits, because it's just a fraction larger than this, so if we lose the C, we lose the C. But, oh. I'm just going to take my little wee measurement. Okay.
Was that one nice before 300?
I'm getting wise.
I think she'd put him in the naughty corner.
That's right.
Oh,
You have to go and sit with the
I think he should be in the naughty corner.
Okay. Oh, sorry. That's right. Okay.
That's better.
I don't know.
Huzzah! Okay. So have a look. Merry Christmas is imprinted in there, and we didn't anneal that metal, so we will get a better impression if we annealed the metal first. Let's anneal one for the other embossing die. Question. Oh, who?
Do you want to have a 10-minute break?
Great idea. While I anneal things and go
And
on
people
with
can
that.
go and grab a coffee, or go to visit the facilities, etc.
Buy tools from Asia. Yes.
Buy tools from Asia.
Can